Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jeff Carroll. I'm the VP of Compliance and Strategy at shipcompliant.com. This is the last session of the day. Please join us for Wine Hour, wine reception following this last panel. I hope you ask questions today. This panel is about third-party marketing. We want to make sure that we answer all of your questions and remove any uncertainty to the extent that we can. Just a quick show of hands, how many people have either participated with a third-party provider or have plans to do so in the semi-near future? Okay, a lot of people in the audience. It's an important and timely topic. Steve touched on it in his address. If you look at the way that products are sold in other industries, especially, a lot of those sales are going through third-party marketers: Amazon, eBay, Buy.com, Walmart.com. I think you're familiar with all these different companies. The internet is obviously here to stay, and so we want to talk about what's going on in the wine industry and how these challenges are being addressed throughout the country. Really excited to have three great panelists with us today. You met Lou in the previous session. Really bright, knowledgeable guy and a great friend of Ship Compliant. One thing that we didn't mention in the previous session, that Lou is also the general counsel of TWIGA, the Texas Wine and Grape Growers Association. So he represents Texas wineries as well. We're going to be doing a little bit of role playing today, if you know what I mean. And Lou, since he used to be the general counsel of the Texas ABC, is going to play the role of the state regulator. Dan Davis is a multi-talented solo practitioner in the field of alcoholic beverage law and has earned a reputation as a can-do lawyer. This demands short, clear, and efficient legal solutions to immediate business needs, not long, detailed memos filled with legal analysis. Dan began working with new ways to promote, sell, and ship wine.
Which is why I'm a solo practitioner.
Long before internet shopping and dinosaurs first roamed the earth. Dan believes innovation does not always need new laws, often just a fresh look at the laws that we already have. Dan today will be playing the role of the third-party provider. Kristen Teckel from the firm Strike and Teckel. Is that a coincidence? Or?
I don't know that person.
Oh, okay. A partner in the firm Strike and Teckel is well-versed in all aspects of alcoholic beverage law. In particular, she is a specialist in the nationwide advertising, promotion, and marketing of alcoholic beverages, including sweepstakes, contests, coupons, and social media. Fun fact of the day is that Kristen was born and raised in Napa, California, and worked the foiling machine at a winery on weekends. Kristen will play the role today of a winery. Please ask questions as we go. I'm going to kick us off with a few. Lou, I'm going to kick it over to you to see if you can. Oh, you know what? I forgot. We have, before we get started here today, I was browsing the internet, and I found a conversation that Kristen was having with a regulator. Haven't tested this to see if it's actually going to work on this computer, but this was not a regulator from the state of California.
Hello, regulator friend. I come in peace. I am here to explain third-party providers to you.
What is a third-party provider? I do not like anything with the word party. Please go away.
Third-party providers do not actually involve parties.
Okay, fine. But they do involve unlicensed people selling alcohol, and you cannot sell alcohol without a license in my state.
Actually, third-party providers do not sell alcohol.
You are a liar. I suspect most are run by serial killers who cannot get a license themselves. Also, I suspect they sell single malt scotch to school children. Also, I suspect that they club cute baby seals.
You are quite suspicious. Are you familiar with e-commerce?
No. Our agency cannot even afford a photocopy machine.
Hello, regulator friend. I am here to explain third-party providers to you.
You mean an unlicensed entity that provides services to a licensee? I don't like how many phone calls I get about third-party providers.
You'd get less calls if you establish basic guidelines. I'd recommend 3 guidelines. Number 1, the licensee has a valid license in your state. Number 2, the licensee retains control. Number 3, the fee paid to the third-party provider is reasonable.
That is too simple. You must be hiding something. Will there be third-party escrow payments flowing into a dedicated holding fund with separate merchant accounts where the accounts are held in the British Virgin Islands and travel costs are paid for mandatory monthly inspections by my staff? I want to return to a time when dinos roamed the earth and no one had a phone to call me complaining about third-party providers.
I'm telling you, it really is quite simple. You should come to the Ship Compliant Direct seminar to learn more. Jeff, you're up.
Good job, Kristen.
Yeah, no kidding.
No problem.
No problem.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lou. Lou, Mr. Regulator, Mr. General Counsel, can you kind of frame this issue for us and tell us what your thought process is as a state regulator?
It ought to be simple, but it's not. See, I don't know if it's the company I'm keeping, but the last year or so, seems like everybody wants to talk about this third-party service. It's gone, man.
Is it on?
Mine says it's on. Yeah.
You can take that one out.
Can you? Just toss it around. Tape.
Is this on?
Wait, you have to wait. No, try again.
Now is it on? No? You know, I'm starting to take this personally. Can you all hear me anyway if I speak up in a robust tone? Seems like every place I've been for the last year or so, all anybody wants to talk about is third-party marketers. And when you think about what it is, it ought to be simple, but when you think about who we are, of course, it's not. Us being liquor people, no holder of any alcoholic beverage license or permit in this country does all of the things that they do in that business by themselves. They have other people who do not hold a license or permit do all kinds of things for them. Some of them are employees, like the 20-something who is usually oblivious that you give money so that he or she can stand behind the counter in your tasting room and hand people wine. Hopefully not children, people, or drunk people, but that's a third-party service provider. The people who...
There you go.
Jesus.
Hey.
Now we'll speak in a more intimate tone. All of those people are third-party service providers, but all the yelling and screaming seems to be about what's happening of relatively recent date in the wine industry, the direct-to-consumer wine industry. I think the reason that is this, that as Jason told us this morning, and as you all well know, that is a booming channel of commerce. And it is growing every day, and lots of people want to get into it, and lots of people want to maximize their position in that channel, to enhance their profits and their sales in that channel. That means that they need services that are not within the core competencies of a winery. Perhaps not even the huge corporate behemoths that stalk the land in California, but certainly not for places like the Big Stump Winery in San Saba, Texas. So they need all kinds of services, and think about what those services are. It's all these people up and down the hallways. They need someone to provide them with an internet platform. They perhaps need someone who has access to attractive intellectual property like the New York Times Wine Club, the Wall Street Journal Wine Club, the National Rifle Association Wine Club. That's going to be big in Texas, I promise. those kinds of things. But to people to process that, people to help them with that orders, people to process the money, the fulfillment houses to do all the things about packaging and addressing and all of that kind of stuff. And that's all just wonderful, but you'll notice that we're having some significant negative regulator actions around the country. Of course, a few years ago, if I understand it right, the California ABC said all them fulfillment house people, they're selling without a license, and that's a sin even in California. And so it stopped for a while, and there was a couple of years of wailing and gnashing of teeth, and Steve talked nasty about people in public conferences outside the state of California. And then California got together, and they came up with the California Advisory that says, here's how we think you can do it consistent with our laws, and everybody was happy, except as we heard earlier today, in Maryland, when they thought they were coming to Maryland in this way of doing business, they filed a bill just like that the Wine Institute people had to kill, that we had some nastiness about it in Nebraska, and we had some real nastiness about it in Texas. What are the regulators so upset about? Well, of course, as the little film implies, here is a certain regulatory mindset. Having lived in the belly of the bureaucratic beast for some years, there is a mindset that says, I've never seen this before, it has to be illegal, let me figure out why. There is a regulatory philosophy that is shared by some regulators, which is, how are you people screwing up that I hadn't caught you at yet? So when you come into a system like this, a regulator looks at wine being offered and wine being sold and wine being delivered, and there's just an awful lot of moving parts in that system. And remember, that regulator never made a dime buying or selling anything. They don't know much of anything about what it's like to actually do a business. And so lots of things that industry people come to regulators and say, this is normal business, people do it every day, is kind of like what this guy in the film says, I don't know anything about that, I don't care anything about that. And so what can happen is that normal, routine kind of relationships that happen innocuously throughout our regulatory experience turn into something, because it's new, into a huge violation. Or it starts with the assumption that it's a violation, and the next thing you know, we're in trouble in Ohio or Nebraska or Illinois or someplace like that. So there are some legitimate regulatory issues, I think, in this, and let me boil them down to three key fundamental issues. First, who is in control? As you know, if you hold a permit, the liquor board wants to know with great detail who is the person or legal entity that owns that permit. Who holds that permit? Who's going to have this? Who's going to have the privilege of selling alcoholic beverages under the authority of this permit? And in just about every state that I know of, it's not just a venal sin; it's a mortal sin to give up control of that business, give up the benefit of that permit to someone else. In Texas, we call that a subterfuge. That is, we've told the state that Lou was the permit, but actually that ex-felon Dan Davis is the one who's running the business. So the first thing a regulator asks, and is of some interest, is who's actually in control here. And when they say, oh, it's the permit holder, is the permit holder doing anything in this complicated process that indicates that he or she actually is in control? That will lead us into questions about who's making decisions about product choice, who's making decisions about pricing, how does the money get sorted out, who's paying who for what does the agreement say, is the agreement in writing? Can I determine what's happening? And control is related directly to what I think is the second core issue here, and that is who's doing what. You know, the legal effect of a permit is to say that if you're going to engage in this list of activities in the state of Texas, California, or even places like Oklahoma, you have to have a permit. So regulators ought to identify in their minds, and you ought to identify in your mind, what activities are happening here that require a permit? Sale, primarily. Who is making the sale? It is sometimes hard to get to the bottom in a multi-part electronic transfer. Where did the sale actually take place? Where did title transfer? How long did it take to process the money before the money ended up in what account? Who's doing the selling? Who is, in some states, doing the solicitation for the order? So control. There are perhaps a host of third-tier issues. For example, a common principle in our industry is that you cannot engage in consignment sales. If you engage in a consignment sale in Texas, you have to sacrifice your firstborn who paves roads for the rest of their life in Texas, because we just take it that seriously. Well, a consignment sale is a transaction under which title does not pass. And so it's important and sometimes hard to trace out in a process that uses multiple phases and stages and all that stuff. It's sometimes hard to point out where title actually passed. So the regulator is going to step into this process and say, wait a minute, who owns the product when? Is the permit holder acting as a consignee for somebody outside my state over whom I don't have any direct regulatory authority? I think those are the key things that get us started in what to talk about third-party marketers.
Kristen, as a winery, I mean, first of all, can you tell us what is a third-party provider? How do we kind of put a definition around what a third-party provider is these days?
There's not a formal definition anywhere, but what most states are considering to be a third-party provider is some unlicensed company that's providing a service of all sorts of different types to a licensed entity. So that could be fulfillment services, it could be shipping service, and what we're really seeing in the modern economy now is it's a website that is really good at marketing and connecting you to a consumer that as a winery you could not otherwise reach. So within that, some third-party providers combine. Sometimes they'll handle fulfillment and marketing. Sometimes they'll only handle one piece. You know, your lawyers, your accountants, those are also third-party providers in the way that the regulators are looking at this.
Dan, California came out with their advisory in 2011. Can you tell us just a little bit about that process and what it is that they said, and then let us know if that advisory applies at all to shipments to other states?
First, I think we'll do the second part first because it's the easiest part, and that is that I'm not real good with microphones, truthfully. The advisory in California applies to California and really nowhere else, but like so much that happens in California, it is often a blueprint for the way other states will think about things. So it is helpful in that sense. Everybody has a different view of the advisory, so I will be happy to give you mine. It starts actually back before the 2011 advisory. There was a 2009 advisory, and before that there was this Attorney General's opinion. Not one of these three things, by the way, are binding, but legally. But all three of them had set out the way in which a third-party provider, before there was ever such a term, could do things. The Attorney General opinion was really quite simple, and it was long before there was an internet. It was back when people used to buy things, are you ready for this, on the phone. Ooh, or by telegraph. Ooh. So I mean, and back then what would happen is somebody would have an order and money, and they would give it to somebody in that state, and then they would send it to California, and lo and behold, a licensee would make the sale. And the question was whether that person getting that money and that order had somehow needed a license. And the Attorney General opinion says they really don't, because they are acting on behalf of the purchaser, not the seller. And we don't need a license to purchase in California yet. And for that reason, you don't need a license. That's sort of it in a nutshell. Fast forward to 2009. 2009, the state looks at the state is concerned because there is already an uptick in third-party providers, and they're concerned with not only the people that are putting consumers together, but I think, it's interesting if Matt were here, I think they actually also had a concern that some of those third-party providers were doing things that licensees can't do. So a licensee can't give you a free corkscrew when you purchase an alcoholic beverage, but these third-party providers were doing that. And I think that ticked off wineries, and I think that ticked off the ABC. And that, in turn, created this, or was the genesis for this for the 2009 advisory, which said, we don't care whether the winery hires you or not. If you receive an order or you solicit an order, you need a license, which is kind of remarkable when you think about it, because just like Lou said, retailers, every business has unlicensed people doing stuff all the time. It's how we get things done. But that was the position, and everybody went nuts. And I actually was working with a number of third-party providers back then, and we actually, Lord knows, we actually set up these programs, and we did as much as we could to comply with that advisory, but you couldn't do it completely, because if you did it completely, you had no business, because you were going to not have a license, and you were going to be hired by licensees. All this concern, so that eventually in 2011, and actually I had very little to do with this except for sitting on a handful of calls, Kristen and Jeff did. 2011, the ABC said, this is a problem, we're going to get together, we're going to talk about this, we're going to come up with a new advisory, and they did. And the important thing about the new advisory is that it essentially says that a licensee, a winery, can work with a non-licensee to promote their product as long as the licensee controls the sale and a number of other things, including how money flows and how orders flow. So that was a big step forward, which in truth was a step backward, because the Attorney General opinion had kind of said that was okay before. The other part of that is my favorite, is that Matt will tell you that it was, the 2011 was a clarification of 2009. Yeah, it was a clarification that sure gave a lot of people a lot of peace, so I think it was maybe a little bit more than that.
Kristen, from your perspective as a winery, was the California advisory from 2011 positive? Was that a successful outcome?
Yeah, as a winery, I'm confused all the time. And I'm literally sitting between a regulator who has the ability to shut down my business on one hand, and somebody who's a really good marketer that may or may not know something about what it means to be a winery and have to be compliant on the other. So the third-party marketing advisor gives you, as a winery, something you can look at and say, okay, if a third-party marketer can come to me in California and say, this is how I'm set up, I comply with this, and if I can ask them a few detailed questions to make sure they really are set up that way, then you know your license is not in jeopardy if you're using them in this state. There's a lieu in every single state, and in every single state, that lieu is a little bit different. Some states, the lieu does not like California because California is hippies and weirdos and super liberal, and if it's allowed in California, they almost want to rebel against it. In other states, they say, this is really well thought out advice from California. I'm going to apply some of the same principles that California bothered to write down. So that's where you're living right now as a winery. You can feel very safe in California using somebody who complies. You can feel relatively safe in most other states if the business complies with California's advisory, with some notable exceptions that you just have to become educated on. Things like Virginia, where there is a very strange law that says you can't use an internet marketing portal unless it's licensed, and in order to get licensed, it has to be an agricultural cooperative, which just functionally makes it impossible to use a third-party marketer in Virginia.
Lou, as a regulator in the great republic of Texas, how do you look at the California 2011 advisory?
Well, I thought it was great government. I mean, that's the way the government is supposed to behave. When I read it kind of as an ex-regulator, and as I would read it as a regulator, I could see that my reaction when I read it was, there's nothing new here in terms of core regulatory principles or how you analyze your way from those principles to practical effect. I mean, the kind of things I said when I first started, everybody does this kind of thing all the time. But when you get to some other states, and I'll tell you, the reaction in Texas is going to be, we don't give a damn how they do it in California. It's all different. Well, it isn't really different, but they'll pretend like it, not just in Texas, but in other states, they'll pretend like it's Texas or not different because of several things. First, the individual regulator may just want a different outcome. And they may just not want this to happen because it just ain't right or it just ain't fair. And sometimes regulatory thinking isn't any more complicated than that. Another reason is because, by God, I'm not going to get caught out in the light in Texas doing something because they did it in California. I mean, that's just not a good authority for me to stand up, because if they say this business model is okay there, then they're going to get flack from other segments of the industry. That regulator is in the middle between dueling segments of the industry, and so they need something to do. A way to handle that, if I were a regulator and someone were saying, look, here's the California advisory, Lou, case closed, right? I would say to them, either on the individual or the systemic level, we have to work our way through that in Texas a step at a time. I have to take you through the why isn't this a subterfuge? Why isn't this a consignment sale? And you have to show me in your individual business model why that's not so. I don't mean that in an adversarial, confrontational kind of way, but I do mean it in the sense that if you're across the table from that regulator is going to have to leave that room and have conversations to which you will not be privy with people who are probably opposed to it. And that regulator has to be able to say to them, no, here's how it works, and here's how, in a way, we don't have the right to say this is illegal. That regulator, if they're doing their job well, and you can help them do their job well, will help you in a collaborative, cooperative way. I don't think I can live with this structure of banking or however you handle your money, but perhaps you can find another way that we can reach peace together on.
Okay, go ahead. Wait. Hold on a second. Let me bring the mic to you. Sorry.
So, Kristen, as the winery, you don't want to hold it for me. This document you're talking about, how do we as the winery get a hold of this advisory? Because I hear you talking about it, but I don't understand how I could find this to apply it to my winery. Where do we find this information?
It's on the internet at www.abc.ca.gov, which is the California ABC's website. And if you go under their industry advisories section, it was released in November of 2011. It's, I think, about the fifth one down after brown bagging alcohol, I think, is the one above it. And it's the only state that has guidance that's out there right now, really both for third-party providers and wineries, to look at and objectively make a model that fits within those four corners. And it's long. It's, I think, 3 pages long, and it's meant to, I think it was meant to give you the whole universe of the way that they think about the issue. I don't think you necessarily have to be compliant with each little tiny bullet point, or something might be able to be a little bit variant on one of the bullet points. It's a holistic look at how they operate with the principles Lou was talking about. Do you have control as the winery? Are they trying to dictate things that they should not be dictating to you? Are they trying to tell you how to price your products? Are they trying to tell you how to ship your products? Are they trying to tell you to ship somewhere that you're not comfortable shipping, or in excess of a limit that you have? How is the money flowing? Do you have control over the funds? Are they taking more than you are? Are they criminals? Are they retail licensees? Are there other things that just look wrong about it? Those should all be red flags to you to ask more questions about their compliance.
Let's talk a little bit about contracts. As a third-party provider, do you have a contract that you execute with wineries?
No, absolutely. And the contracts I've drafted go right down that third-party advisory, because I think it's, even though in my heart of hearts I think so much of that advisory is wrong, I don't care, because it's a safe harbor, and it's a safe harbor that my clients can live with. And if they can live with it, God knows I can. So I go down that advisory and I make sure there's control. And control is, what Lou said is absolutely true, but it's equally true that the 18-year-old that Lou talked about, he controls that damn sale at the convenience store. Putting that aside, control is a big issue, so make sure you take care of control. The money is a big issue in a lot of states, specifically California, so you make sure the money flows the way the states want the money to flow, which usually means to the licensee and then back to the provider, which is, again, zero authority, but makes people feel good. And then those are the two things that come immediately to mind. Also, because California has always had this thing about percentages, and other states have this thing about percentages, they say that a non-licensee can't earn a percentage of a sale, but they can earn a flat rate of a sale. Just because it's a red flag, I take care of that too. And those are sort of the 3 things that come to my mind. How do you take care of it? How do I take care of it? I just make sure it's in the agreement. In other words, I mean literally when the the tougher, the bad advisory, for lack of a better phrase, came out, I used my contracts all had language in that. Even though the advisory would still have found that contract a problem, I made sure all that language is in there. Now it's easier. Now you've got a perfectly logical advisory, and you just make the contract fit with that. Did that answer the question? I'm sorry. Do you have a set fee then? Oh, I see. Oh, I say fixed instead of a percentage. If it's.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Sure.
Tom is not waiting for the microphone in the back there. Do you have a set fee
Right.
For your marketing services in your contract?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one that is kind of silly, that the ABC worries about it, frankly. The ABC has this thing about percentages, so you can't have a percentage in there. But what you can have is a flat fee, and indeed, as a rule, you can have a flat fee that varies in steps, so that if it's between $50 and $100, you make it $10. If it's between 100 and 200, you make it 20. So it is truly form over substance, but it makes people more comfortable. And frankly, there are a lot of contracts where they negotiate a fixed fee on each and every item that's offered.
Lou, as a regulator, are you what kinds of things are you looking for if you're looking at one of these contracts?
I think I learned when I was in an agency that industry people have an elevated sense of how well regulators understand business, just basic business practice. And now since I've left the agency and am privileged to represent people in business, many of them are not as sophisticated as I thought they were. I mean, I've run across a lot of people who say, no, we didn't put that in writing. I've known Bill forever. Here's our deal. And it may not, there's no requirement in the law for these arrangements to be in writing, but they should be, and they should be as specific as possible, because what happens is a regulator who does or does not understand any of this stumbles into what you are doing, walks into your place of business or your service provider's place of business and asks the high school graduate clerk who's just lifting boxes, what are you doing here? How does this deal work? And they tell him something that is wrong and sounds incriminating, and that regulator is now 100 yards down the road towards deciding that you're violating the law, and it's hard to roll them back. So I say what Dan says and what Kristen says, which is put it in writing and make it very clear on those critical points. Of course, you would get competent legal advice about that here in California, but on those critical points about control and how the process works. There's another dynamic that Dan mentioned that I want you to think about. It's one of the things that made me crazy as a regulator, and it makes me crazy now. And it is this. To use Texas language, the idea of giving someone else the use and benefit of your permit, of giving up control of your permitted business, is an unlawful subterfuge. But nobody in Texas, not even God, knows with any precision what that means actually in practice. That's because nobody has ever litigated it before. And so what you get is a whole barn full of idiosyncratic regulatory fiats, exercises of fiat. If you're paying your third-party service provider by a percentage of sales, that is an illegal subterfuge. And they'll tell you that till the cows come home in Texas. No, it is not. It is not. It might be evidence of it, but it is not. So you can rail against that injustice and take them to court and be proved that you're right after you go into bankruptcy for paying your trial lawyer, or you can do what we're saying to do. You can figure out what those quirks are and then figure out how to make your business model work around it. I think one of the fortunate things that I've come across in third-party service provider models that I've looked at is that when those folks come, they come with a fair degree of flexibility about how their business model can work, so that you can sit down with a regulator and say, we'd like to do it in this way, but if you've got objections to that, let's figure out how we can modify it. So the more flexible you can keep your model before the regulator says, yeah, that's okay, probably the better off you are, I think.
And I think from the winery perspective, what you want to see in a contract is the most conservative contract that you possibly can, because you've got your third-party provider on one hand saying, I've got this on lockdown, and you've got a regulator who's confused on the other hand saying, I don't believe that you're telling me the truth about what's actually happening here. And the regulator has got jurisdiction over you to demand that you hand that contract over. And it's not the third-party provider that's going to have to explain the terms of the contract and how it works. It's you. You're the licensee. You're responsible for the transaction and control. So if there's things in the contract when you review it that don't match the advisory, that should be a red flag that you need to understand why and how, and make sure that you are maintaining control over that piece. And I do want to warn, friendly warning to wineries, that it seems in talking to regulators in a variety of states that there is this growing trend towards wanting to see the contracts because they have a naturally suspicious sense of what's happening. I think the majority of third-party providers are completely compliant models where the wineries really are controlling the transaction and shipping compliantly under their license, but it won't make you immune from a regulator picking you to hand over the contract and talk to you about it. So you want to make sure you understand the contract and are going to be completely comfortable talking with them about it if that happens to you.
Kristen, staying with you for a quick second, what kinds of things do you look out for, do you not want to see in a contract?
As a winery,
As a winery.
I want the ability to accept or reject orders. I want the ability to do compliance checks, especially with things like capacity cap shipment. I want the ability to interface with an age verification program so they don't have to worry about that. I want to know about fulfillment. Do I have to drop my product off somewhere, or do I manage fulfillment? If I want to know if there's anything other than my licenses being used. So is this going to be reported under my direct shipping licenses, or is there something else going on here? If there is something else going on here, I want to dig all the way down into it. I want to know what states the offer is going to go out to, and I want to make sure it's not going to any states where I don't have a license for shipment. I want to look at the compensation structure, and what I really want to see is it fair? In my opinion, what regulators are looking for is something that looks like the third party has taken over the sale and is actually doing your job in selling the wine. So what are they really providing for you? Can they reach somebody that you could never reach on your own? And what's the value of that to your business? Flat fees are great and concern me less than percentages. When you get into percentages, there is no fixed rule. There are some states that say 1%. It makes them uncomfortable. Have they regulated against it? No. But if you see something in a contract that says 50%, probably most regulators would have a concern with that. So you want to start thinking about how you would respond to a regulator if they said, what is this person doing for you that gives them a good reason for taking 50% of the sales you make through this channel? So those are the types of things I would look at.
Are third-party providers actually confirming that the winery holds the licenses they say they have? And if not, I mean, does that come back to the winery or is that the third party?
Right. The question is, are third-party providers actually confirming that the licensees have the licenses that they say they have?
Are you third-party provider?
I think that'll vary from third party to third party, but bottom line is this. The winery will have some licenses. And if that winery doesn't have the licenses it needs, the existing licenses are at risk. So the person that's in the best position to know what licenses they need, and just as Kristen was saying, where the product's going and whether or not they need a license is the person that's selling the wine. And it should be. So I think it's an option whether the third-party provider looks at it or not. The winery had better know whether or not they have the licenses they need because they're the one who's on the hook. Yes, Anne?
So I just want to point out, Wine Institute, a lot of the larger third-party providers are associate members. We always invite them to come in and run through their programs with Steve Rose or myself and find out how they work so we can then answer questions from wineries, especially the ones who are happy to do that. Or if there's a new entity out there, to go and talk to them for members and find out what they're doing. And some of them are very careful and they will check the licenses that all of their wineries hold. And like I said, other ones will not. But an unlicensed third-party provider can't do anything that you can't do yourself. So that's how I look at it. They're just
So just to recap what Annie said, is that Wine Institute will often evaluate some of these third-party marketing programs, especially the bigger ones, and they offer to their members to answer any questions based on what what they've learned about those programs. That's a good point. Go ahead, Tiffany.
You sort of alluded to this by saying you want to know in what states the third-party marketers are sending out solicitations. Is that, or is part of the reason because you're concerned that that third-party marketer can get you in trouble in a franchise state where you already have a wholesaler who is going to be selling to retailers, et cetera, and that might violate the franchise laws of that state?
Can you repeat the question, Kristen?
Sure. So Tiffany asked, as I mentioned that I was concerned about where they were shipping to or where they would be soliciting orders from when I'm looking at a third-party provider as a winery. And as part of that concern, because my product might already have a traditional distribution chain in some of the states, and that I could have problems implicating franchise law violations in states if I were to ship to them. Did I get that question right? So yeah, I'm concerned about where that third-party provider wants me to try and get orders from for a variety of levels. One, because I think it's one of the easiest ways to tell when you're dealing with somebody who does not know what they're doing. If somebody is shipping to Utah, do not work with them. There are those low-lying fruit states where there's no way to get there. And if they're telling you, oh yeah, I'm a third-party provider, I can get you there, it's a really big sign that they're not doing things right. And there's also an issue with some third-party providers that you need to be aware of and just pay attention to, which is that in states where getting to a consumer directly via a permit is not possible, there's often a channel set up in the state where the product can hit an importer and a wholesaler and a retailer before it gets to the consumer. If that is being used, it works in a lot of states. It's a legally compliant model in a lot of states, but it's also got a lot of complications. There's issues with label registration. There's definitely issues with franchise rights, which means another wholesaler in the state might have a right to that product, and the wholesaler that you're using in this channel is not the same wholesaler. You can get into massive litigation with that, and you can also make your wholesaler, where you're making a lot more sales than you are through a direct sale, very angry. And if you're with that wholesaler in another state, it can have big implications. So you have to pay attention to all of that. The cleanest and simplest thing is when I'm a winery and I see a contract that's on lockdown, I'm going to pay them 6%, and I have complete control, and I'm going to handle all of the fulfillment. And I'm only shipping to states where I've got a direct permit that allows me to ship directly to a consumer. Green light, go, do it. As soon as those other elements come in, you have to kind of go down the rabbit hole about the states where you're concerned and make sure that you're comfortable participating in those states. Most third-party providers will let you pick states and control. So if there is a state where you're uncomfortable, it's sometimes the case that you can say, I'm not down with Ohio, but I'm good everywhere else.
I mean, frankly, if you're controlling the sale, you should tell them where you're selling. I mean, that just seems axiomatic. I'm always surprised when people don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, a real simple, obviously, tool is to have an acceptance mechanism, right? Where any order that comes through a third-party provider that is going to ship on your license, you actually accept it, you know where it's going, and you know if you're going to ship it out of your warehouse or if it's going through a third party, and that kind of thing. It really goes a long way to have that kind of automated acceptance process. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that, Jeff, you're just talking about an acceptance mechanism, but I think earlier Kristen had mentioned advertisement. So if the acceptance mechanism is in place and the winery's in control of the transaction, how worried about advertisement?
I think I said solicitation, which I consider to be very different than an advertisement.
Right.
I think advertisements can go anywhere, and I love the Constitution.
Brian, go ahead.
A question for Dan. Okay, percentages are bad, but if you would, what is the range of percentage that third-party providers are taking from wineries nowadays?
That's candidly, that's an argument that's something I really don't want to discuss. I mean, truly, because it is a large range. I mean, it really is.
What's the sort of sweet spot where people are operating in? Is it 20 to 30%, 5%, 45%?
I think it really depends. I mean, it really depends on the business. It depends on how much of a benefit they're giving to that. I mean, here's the thing about all of this that just amazes me. Third-party providers and wineries are grown-ups, you know? And they should be able to negotiate what makes sense for their business. And if you don't like what the third-party provider's charging, You go somewhere else or you sell it yourself. So while I understand the issues of how much is the third-party provider making, at some level it's sort of like, well, if you overpay your CEO and you go out of business, that's a problem too, and nobody's concerned about that. The fact that maybe 3% of your business has there's a large charge for maybe 5% of your business just doesn't make sense to me that should be as big of an issue. So I'm the first to admit I'm intentionally dodging it because there are I have not read every third-party provider, and the ones I've worked on have all been all over the range.
Deanna, go ahead.
One of the things I've seen some of the third-party providers do is not charge sales tax and say that sales tax is included in the price, but when they give the information back to the wineries, they're not separating that. As the winery, are you concerned about that? Because you're going to have to pay that money if you didn't collect.
Right. So the question is, if the third-party provider is not collecting, if they're presenting the order to the consumer and they're not presenting sales tax as part of that transaction, is that a concern for you as a winery that they're not collecting that sales tax?
I don't know if I guess it depends on exactly what's happening. As a winery, I'm very aware I need to pay sales tax, and I am going to pay sales tax. And if part of the contract setup indicates that the way that the interface is going to work or the money I'm going to get is not going to enable me to pay sales tax, then that's a problem. But I should be able to set my own price for the product. And I believe it was mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a difference between being forced to collect sales tax and being forced to remit it. So you have control of your pricing. You have to have control of your pricing when you're using a third-party provider model. If you know that they're not going to have sales tax collection functionality where it can be broken out, then you need to make sure you set your price so that you can cover it and pay your obligations. But if I just don't want to handle that because it's extra, then I'm going to pick only third-party providers that have an interface that works the way that I want and that interfaces with a sales tax interface that shows what it is by county and all the different wine sales tax rates that you need to manage, because it's hard to manage.
I wonder if there's any systems out there that help you calculate wine sales tax.
I don't know.
That would be-
Compliance.
Go ahead, Tom.
So talking about the winery and the third-party provider, a one-on-one situation, but third-party providers are generally handling many wines for many wineries. And one order would come in and it would be 4 wineries. It seems to me that third-party providers may not really have to care about the client, say one of those wineries is. You're saying yes, you should be compliant and pay sales tax. Well, we know that many wineries don't pay sales tax. If only they knew about ship compliance. But I don't know if this is a question for this session, but whether you want to create 1 box and not 4 boxes. Is there an issue here? This is so much intellectual horsepower. What is the issue of putting wines from different wineries, different brands in the same package? You know, I think the regulator is inclined to think of that in terms of this permit is selling this product to that consumer. I mean, that's the way that works, because all of these sales and all of the regulated activities attendant to that sale are attributable or should be attributable to a permit. And that's what Matt's going to do. When he looks at that sale, he's going to say, under the authority of what permit was that sale made? And then he's going to look at what actually was sold and whether that permit had the authority to make that sale. Matt, am I incorrect about that?
No, you are correct. And I'm still trying to figure out if you told me an idiot or no, I mean, and for that purpose, I mean, as long as you can identify segregate the sale,
Right.
selling what, you can stuff it all in the same box.
Yeah. As long as the invoicing is right. But let me touch a point before I sit down, and that is about who cares about whose compliance. If because we seem to be asking a lot of questions about the quality and kind of service you get from a third-party service provider. Remember, if you've got a contract and you're covered down with that person and they violate the law in some way, acting under the authority of your permit in Texas, California, and everybody else, they're going to come after your permit for that violation. And it's not going to be a defense to say, yeah, but I told him not to do that. Or even, oh, when he made that violation, he was in violation of our contract. Well, that's between you and the third-party service provider, because between you and the regulator, that was an unlawful activity, sale, or whatever that happened under your permit, and your permit will pay the price if they can prove it in court. So that is something to pay a fair bit of attention to, is how reliable your third-party service provider is.
It's a really good question, I think, that Tom raises as well. And I think that Matt actually gave a very reasonable answer to that question. But you're not necessarily going to get that same answer in other states. But it certainly is a barrier right now, the fulfillment costs. If you look at like an Amazon situation, for example, if you order wines from 4 different wineries, you're getting 4 boxes. Is that right, Kristen?
That is correct.
And that's expensive. And so, you know, California may have a position on that. And I'm sure that Matt would qualify that and say, well, each winery has to be licensed. Each winery has to individually accept those orders. There should be sub-invoices and all these types of things before that can happen. But that would be probably, some states may take a different look on it. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I gave a brief response, but to make it happen, all the wine has to be coming from the same proper
Same location.
location.
Right.
So you can't send one box around to multiple wineries and pay for every bottle of every stores.
Yeah.
What typically happens is that the wineries will have their fulfillment house, like 14 warehouse, that's their agent to pull their wine and put it in a box. Once you get past that, which is acceptable in California,
Right.
then it's not a hard pull to say, well, why not just put 4 bottles from 4 different wineries in the same box with 4 different invoices that accomplish the goal.
Yeah.
There's also the issue of when it's really for the common carrier.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that FedEx allows them. UPS may.
It's certainly a technical challenge, I think, with the state agencies. I don't think that the California ABC necessarily looks very closely at these FedEx and UPS reports. That's more for like the Board of Equalization on taxing. But in other states, the ABCs are taking a close look at those carrier reports, and you know, historically, the carriers are semi-limited in their ability to report that kind of thing. You know, and then in the 25 or so states where they actually can report those shipments to the states, there typically is going to be one licensee associated with one tracking number, and so. Just from a pure technical and procedure, you know how difficult it is for some of these big companies to change their procedures. It's, if nothing else, it's a technical challenge to pull that off. Anything to add to that? Okay, Annie.
Oh, I have a question.
Go ahead. Sure.
I have some third-party provider websites. They offer, I don't know the consensus or the legal opinion on this. They offer a discount if you recruit a friend who purchases something. A coupon or $50 off if you send this to a friend, and then a friend later buys something. So in a sense, and then if they go on and they buy like a $20 or $30 bottle of wine, it's almost like the person, you know, you're getting a finder's fee, but it's not. How does that affect the winery, or is that something the winery should
I'm gonna,
be concerned with, or?
Dan?
or
Oop,
be
I don't care.
concerned with?
I'll pass it on to Dan. So the question is, what if the marketing agent or the third-party provider has some kind of referral program where you sign up a friend, you get a $25 virtual credit for future purchases? What are the possible implications of that?
I think the first implication is what Lou described, and that is you're responsible for what the third-party marketer did. So if the winery licensee is somehow tied to that third-party marketer's activity, it had better comply as though the winery itself had done it. And with that specific example of paying a consumer to refer you to another consumer, that's one of those things where you'd want to talk to your lawyer about it. Because, for example, my guess is Matt and I might disagree as to how that is. There is a risk, because in California, you as a licensee cannot give any gift-free goods or premium in connection with the sale or marketing of wine. And you can't do that directly or indirectly. So there is at least a potential liability that money being paid to the consumer could be interpreted by the ABC, at least, as a gift-free goods or premium. So you'd want to be pretty careful how it was structured and make sure that it was on the side of not violating the law rather than on the side of violating the law. Matt, do you have any thoughts on it? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, it becomes a serious risk for you, and this is something that we have pointed out in this whole discussion in the last few years about unlicensed third parties. They are agent, you own whatever they do. Now, the challenge with that sort of particular thing is when the website, the third party goes off the reservation and starts doing things, offering gifts, whatever, to the consumer to get people to use their site, without respect to whose particular winery is involved, and you're not involved
Right.
in that decision. So what we're going to do as an enforcement reality of life is find the cheapest bottle of wine on that website, and that's the winery that's going to end up with a $10,000 violation for giving, indirectly, a premium gift or free goods. Now, whether or not it is in fact a premium gift or free goods, that gets back to Dan's point about how do you structure it.
Exactly.
For example, an incentive that is converted into a discount on the next purchase. That's not necessarily a premium gift or free goods, because we don't regulate pricing. But if it's like, here's a $25 gift card for use, whatever, or $20 branded corkscrew, now you've got a problem.
Matt, while I have you, I'm just curious. I had said earlier, and I just don't know whether this is true or not, but my sense was that in 2009, that part of the impetus of the first advisory was that the ABC was concerned about these unlicensed entities doing things that a licensed entity couldn't do, with free corkscrews and the like, or was that not such a big deal?
Oh, no, that was a huge deal.
That's what I thought.
That's obviously part of the equation, because you're getting all of these websites popping up with free shipping, free corkscrews, free this, that, and the other thing.
Okay, good. I didn't lie. I just wanted to find out. Thanks.
Then you get into the whole structure of, we didn't have any idea what these things were, but we started getting on target with you guys about, well, we use this one, we use that one. And it's like, well, what the hell are these? And who's running your business now?
My own sense is around the country, you're going to get a series of answers like that have great variations from state to state, so that I've got a permit to sell into Texas or Oklahoma or New Mexico, and I can sell wine, and I've got all that set up. But when you get into, can I throw in something free? Can I offer a coupon? Can I do a discount? My sense is that's going to be a real maze around the state, and probably a process that's hard to manage multi-states. I mean, you can figure out any one of them, but that's an area where you're going to have more variation between California and Texas and New York and Illinois and all of that. I just think that's a real mess for you to try to manage.
And for the winery perspective, I'd say the state where you're located and where your core license is the most important state for you to comply with. So if you're a California winery, you don't want the word free on any promotions that they're giving out, and deep discounts are great. Really deep discounts are great, like Lori Ajax was talking about this morning, down to 1 cent is even okay, but when something's free, that puts your core licenses at some risk in California. And also, to Lou's point, every single state treats discounting differently, which you guys know as wineries. Most of their discount laws don't specifically talk about direct shipped wine and pricing on that. So it is something that you should try and learn about to make sure that there's nothing that's an aggressive discounting strategy that's going to cause enforcement in the state. And a conservative strategy, if you don't want to go through the problem of learning the discounting rules in every single state, is just to stick with relatively moderate discounts to avoid things like sales below cost that trigger things in a lot of states, and just to generally not give anything away for free.
Seems like a lot of the advice is to talk to an attorney.
Go figure.
You guys have any recommendations on good alcoholic beverage attorneys that they could talk to? Okay, we've got time for, no? Okay. We've got time for one or two more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So, two things, sorry, and I'll make it quick. All of the third-party marketers that are listed on Ship Compliant, can I tell my wineries, because I've told them, don't do it, I don't want to deal with it? But if they're listed on your Ship Compliant site, I'd like to tell them, yes, they're checked out, they're good to go, like about 18. But then for Amazon, it comes through the winery, and as long as the reporting is correct and there's no free things or anything, I mean, aren't we okay? Because it's just like bringing a friend into the winery saying, hey, my friend wants to buy wine. Yes, ship it to Oregon. That's really what they're doing. They're friendly.
I mean, the question is, there's marketers that have been listed in Ship Compliant. Amazon's not one of them. So how do we kind of deal with and advise people to evaluate these programs? And our goal in Ship Compliant is to provide software tools to the extent that we can to put you in the control of the transaction. And that includes things like having an order acceptance mechanism, making sure that you have opted these products in and approved these products for sale with that particular marketer. And we do go through certain steps to ensure that each marketer that has been listed in our site is following the rules. However, there's things that are outside. I mean, we don't negotiate a lot of these things that you would, that we've talked about in terms of putting them in the contract, like the pricing. We're completely outside of that, and a lot of these things you would negotiate kind of directly with the marketer, and so you should still be aware of those things. And the question about Amazon, I mean, without talking specifically about Amazon, any shipment that you make under your license is on your license, right? And so if you're, right, if you're using Ship Compliant for your direct-to-consumer sales and you're aggregating all of your orders across all your channels, from your e-commerce to your wine club to your tasting room, whatever, you got to make sure that order from Amazon ends up in your account so that we can run a comprehensive compliance check and include that order on your state reporting. So one way or the other, you for any third-party order that you take, if you are a Ship Compliant direct customer, make sure that you bring that in so that we can provide all those services to make sure you're in compliance with your direct-to-consumer licenses. We have built a technical integration with Amazon such that if you place it, if an order is placed on your site and it lands in your Seller Central account, we can actually go grab that and pull it down and run a compliance check against your account. So it's kind of a convenient tool. And so, yes, we have a technical integration with Amazon.com. And we'll run those actually through our third-party compliance check rules, which are slightly different. Really the only, and we talked about that a little bit, the only state where we actually currently have an exception is Virginia. We're going to really block those shipments because none of these third-party marketers that we're talking about are agricultural cooperatives in the state of Virginia. And so we'll block those, but likely there's a lot of activity. We talked about Nebraska and Maryland and Texas and all these states that are actually considering these issues. Everybody's going through a process. California started it early. They really set kind of they created a model that other states can follow. I think they did a really great job, had a collaborative process and a very good, reasonable result. It's going to take other states some time to go through that same process. And so that's kind of what you're seeing going on right now. So I expect there to be additional rules in other states that you will probably have to comply with that we'll make sure that we build into the software system to the extent that we can to make sure that you're going to be in compliance with those. Does have anything to add to that? Okay, one last question.
Talked you into a stupor, huh? You're thinking about wine. I just know it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to end this just a little bit early, but I think we'll all, if you guys want, stick around. If you guys want to answer some one-on-one questions or particular model, that kind of thing, we'll all stick around up here. Please come on up and ask your questions. I want to just ask you to give a round of applause to our excellent panelists today.